this is an angry show. And I don't mean that as condemnation. I mean, at the very, very end, not to, I mean, but I feel like you sort of have to get to the end. You know, when the Verna figure, this supernatural figure, she offers this deal to Roderick and Madeline Usher. You can have it all, and your kids will pay the price. And that struck me that's some fuck you baby boomers. Oh, can I curse on this? Is
Yeah, yes, you can.
okay? All right. Sorry.
No,
I mean,
no,
sorry,
no.
sorry, mom.
Welcome, friends, to episode 290 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss the second half of Mike Flanagan's 2023 series, The Fall of the House of Usher.
And joining us upon the chamber door this week is Bram-Stoker-Award-Winning author of The Fisherman, John Langan. Welcome, John.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining us. This was a fun project right around Halloween, and I hope that you enjoyed watching it as well. We want to start out by asking John, what is your history with Edgar Allan Poe? And also, has he been an influence? Because you're a horror writer. Has he been an influence to you? What is his standing in the horror community?
Oh, I think he's a foundational figure. And I think that he is one of those, and he's a foundational figure in American literature. And to a large extent, I mean, I think you could even argue in French literature, the French translate him and the Russians get him. And so Poe's influence, you know, sort of disseminates throughout world literature. Speaking personally, I have a vivid memory of buying a book of Poe's short stories with an introduction by Vincent Price. And that seemed to make the book even scarier somehow. And it was a paperback with teeny tiny prints in it. But I think it was when I came to high school and then college, I guess. Really, college was where we read Poe. I read Poe in my freshman English class, and we read him very attentively. And we read stories like The Mask of the Red Death and Ligeia, with a great deal of attention paid to the descriptions that Poe makes of, say, landscapes or really structures, buildings. And I became really fascinated by Poe, and Poe has just sort of remained with me. And in a sense, he's a more foundational influence for me than Lovecraft, whom I came to a bit later, and whom I respond to on a kind of intellectual level, if you will. But I think with Poe, there's that sense that there's something a little bit more primal, at least for me as a writer, with Poe. I contributed a story about 13 or 14 years ago to an anthology called Poe that Ellen Datlow edited. Yeah, it was 2009 because it was the bicentenary of Poe's birth. And I contributed a story to that was a riff on The Mask of the Red Death that was really directly inspired by that freshman English class and our reading of the Mask of the Red Death. So yeah, Poe remains for me just a present. And I teach high school English. And so I teach Poe every year. And it's one of the people you'll hear teachers say, what I love about teaching is that my students teach me things, or, you know, that being in the classroom teaches me things. And I find that continues to be the case with Poe, and in particular, reading things, a poem like The Raven. Within the last couple of years of teaching and reading that poem, that's kind of opened up to me in ways that it never had in the past, and to the extent that I now think it's one of the great poems in the language. But, you know, we can talk about that later.
You mentioned Vincent Price as well. Are you a fan of the Roger Corman adaptations of Poe's work?
How can you not be a fan? What kind of monster is not a fan of the Roger Corman adaptations? I mean, they're cheesy, sure. But they had, you know, most, if not all of them, had, as I recall, had scripts by Richard Matheson, where Matheson, in some ways, you know, it's kind of analogous, or at least there's a parallel between what he was trying to do, take these Poe stories and expand on them, knit them together. And there's a kind of a precedent, I guess, for what Flanagan is up to in the series.
I love that. I wanted to ask you, what is the name of that story, the Mask of the Red Death story?
It's called Technicolor, and it's in my second collection of stories, The Wide Carnivorous Sky and Other Monstrous Geographies. Technicolor was supposed to be the original title of the collection, but my publisher was worried that the term was copyrighted, and I
Oh.
think Technicolor still would have been a great title. But
That's really cool. I'll make sure to add that to our bookshop. We have a bookshop, and I already put The Fisherman on there. Which,
thank
by the
you,
way, I haven't finished yet. I am over halfway through. I'm loving it. I just, I've been
thank you.
traveling and covering this, so I haven't been able to get all the way done with it yet. But I've been playing this game called Dredge in the past. I don't know if you're familiar with this video game, but it's
I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a Lovecraft influenced fishing game, like fishing sim, where you're riding around in a boat and fishing. And I was like, I need to go back to that game and boot it up while I'm listening to because I've been listening on the audio.
Oh, and the
Because
audio
I
is
was, yeah,
fantastic. That guy
it's
is
really good.
just great. He's such a great narrator. I'm so grateful for him.
Yeah, and I was like, this would be a perfect pairing, honestly, because you can see their Lovecraft influence. It's creepy. It's got all this fishing stuff going on. Highly recommend it to our listeners. If you like Poe, if you like The Fall of the House of Usher, you should check out that novel. And it's an award winner.
It is. It is through the grace of God, I suppose, because of that particular Stoker ballot was just crammed full of talent. Not that it always isn't, but I guess when it's your book, you're aware of. I was trying to remember everybody who was on the ballot: Paul Tremblay and Stephen Graham Jones and Bracken McLeod, and I know I'm forgetting. I can't remember if Alma Katsu was on it too. But it was just any of the books on that ballot could have won, and no one could have complained. None of
Yeah.
us could have complained. It was so. I just felt very fortunate that the voters picked my book.
So I wanted to say I also started your book. I'm not quite as far as Luke is, but when he pitched it to me, he said it's a Lovecraftian story and it's called The Fisherman. And right away, I started having a film background. I started thinking about a film that was hugely popular recently. And now I know your work came first, but The Lighthouse came to mind for me. It's very different, but I had to ask with a story that's kind of about some tangential topics. Are you a fan of that film?
Oh, I love Edgar's work. I'm a big The Witch, Lighthouse, The Northman. Even though I think The Northman, I mean, the end of that movie is like the most Viking metal ending ever. Two naked Vikings
Yeah,
fighting in a volcano. Like the Vikings would have watched that movie and been like, yeah,
yeah.
past the mead horn or whatever. Yeah, no, I really like Edgar's stuff, and I like he has this strong sense of I don't know, artistic vision, which changes a little bit for, depending on what story it is that he's telling. But yeah, I'm always fascinated by any artist who is true to you can sort of see a particular vision that they are true to or chasing, or however you'd like to put that. And Eggers, he's definitely one of the contemporary filmmakers that I'm most interested in and excited by. So Nosferatu next, I guess. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be something we're excited to get into. We're going to cover Dracula around the same time, I think, and really get into it. But pivoting now to Flanagan, we talk a lot about these auteurs, right? And like you're talking about Eggers, like definitely that kind of a filmmaker. And I'm wondering where Flanagan falls in for you. Like, are you a fan of his other work? We covered The Haunting of Hill House on the show. We've also done Doctor Sleep by him. And so we've touched on a few of his adaptations. He's doing more of them. He seems to really be someone who does a lot of adaptations. How did you feel about the rest of his work? And then we can start talking about this one in particular.
I'm a big fan of his work. I had a brief conversation with him several years ago. There was a chance that he was going to adapt The Fisherman, and so we had a phone conversation with him and his people, and it didn't work out ultimately. But he's a lovely guy. He's a very sweet guy, and in preparation for that meeting, I had crammed like all the films I hadn't seen. I was like, I have to watch all these movies, but they stood up to it, and so I think I probably didn't see what's the one that's at like Ouija, Origin of Evil, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think I didn't see that one, but I'd seen everything else, and I thought his adaptation of like Dr. Sleepsay was terrific. I thought that was because from a kind of meta perspective, it managed to blend novel and film of The Shining so well together, and bring that all to an end where you wind up in the same place ultimately as The Shining, right? Also Dr. Sleep. So He's got this wonderful cast of actors that he just uses again and again in all these different kinds of roles. We've seen that in the miniseries, but some of those people like Henry Thomas, you know, he was in Doctor Sleep. He was there in Gerald's Game. So and also the actress whose name just went right out of my head, who plays Tamerlane in the Fall of the House of Usher. She was, what was it, Bev, the sort of religious fanatic in Midnight Mass. So that's the interesting thing too, is the way he takes these people and you're like, I know who that is, but then they're in a completely different role in some ways. But yeah, no, I'm a big fan of his stuff. And I was listening to an interview with him on, I think it was Neil McRoberts' Talking Scared podcast, and he was expressing his personal frustration that the work he's done on Netflix is not available on DVD, you know, and I get it, right? Netflix is going to make sure that you keep going to Netflix, but damn, I would love some DVD editions of those shows with all the extras, and because, you know, they have to have recorded stuff, you know, there have to be all sorts of interviews, and I would love to see that. I hope at some point we will. But yeah, no, I went into this. I went into watching this with high hopes and happy to see what Mike was going to come up with next.
I can't wait to hear your thoughts on its relation to the source in this case, because it sounds like you're a big Poe fan. You're clearly very well read in that space. I could see people finding it controversial. Did you? And how did you react to the changes that were made here?
I think there were a few things that became clear to me once I'd watched the whole thing, because I feel like especially with this, it's in essence, you know, the framing the narrative, right, is the conversation between Roderick Usher and Dupin as old men at the very end. So all of this we're getting is a kind of retrospective narration. With a lot of it, you know, Dupin says at certain points, how could you know what you're claiming to know? And, you know, Usher says they told me, right, you know, but whether so I mean, we could take like there's another, if you will, meta kind of thing going on where because Usher has this type of vascular dementia and he's hallucinating and whatever, there were certain parts of the story that you could argue, you know, did this really happen, or was this just Usher's interpretation, his invention to explain how this kid or that kid wound up dying in this particular way? But it struck me, I've noticed a few people already saying, this isn't like Flanagan's other stuff. You know, he always shows the compassionate side of things. And yeah, that is in some ways absolutely true. But I think that this is an angry show. And I don't mean that as condemnation. I mean, at the very, very end, not to, I mean, but I feel like you sort of have to get to the end. You know, when the Verna figure, this supernatural figure, she offers this deal to Roderick and Madeline Usher. You can have it all, and your kids will pay the price. And that struck me that's some fuck you baby boomers. Oh, can I curse on this? Is that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Sorry, sorry, mom. But it's definitely like a shot across the bow of the baby boomers. You know, it's you guys, and what has, you know, you look at what Usher Pharmaceuticals has done. Of course, obviously, they're taking aim at the Sacklers, oxycodone, all that kind of stuff. And you know, may I add just my own whatever soapbox, rightfully so. But beyond that, you know, the plant, to go back to the very first second episode where Perry meets his end, you know, that structure is a wonderful kind of a metaphor or a symbol for the Usher family. They had this place, it's full of all this terrible stuff, and they were just going to let somebody else handle it. And then what happens? Boom, it gets one of their own. So yeah, I looked at it as this is, and to take it just a little bit further, you know, we see at one point Mark Hamill, whom I absolutely loved as the Pym Reaper, shows us these photographs that he's found of Verna with all these different less than positive figures in our culture today, I might say. And she says, oh yeah, one of my other guys, I told him he could kill someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and no one. Who could she have been talking about?
I don't know.
It struck me that like Flanagan is not he's not being subtle here. This is not the subtleties of human emotion. This is yeah, you could say it's heavy-handed, but I think deliberately so. You know, if you know Poe at all, when you see the title, The Pit and the Pendulum, you know there's going to be a pendulum somewhere with a big blade on the end of it. And so part of what you're doing is you're just waiting to see how that thing is going to play in. So I was intrigued with the use that he made of all the Poe, sort of architecture and armature to tell his particular story. And I think there's a sad commentary ultimately on maybe human corruptibility or something like that. There were these moments where in episodes 5 and 6, I want to say, where the characters Vic and then Tammy have a moment with their significant other where they could just say I love you, where they could just be they could, but Vic draws back from saying I love you and it's like basically how can I buy you, and so they're unable to be their better selves, I guess, and that as much as anything contributes to their demise. I think the series raises a kind of interesting question about heredity and nature versus nurture, because so many of because we know that Froderick, as they call him, and Tamerlane were basically raised by Usher. The parents split up and then he got them because he just offered them stuff. And so he was sort of responsible in a way for corrupting them because he exercised no restraint over what they could get. And we certainly don't have any sense that Aunt Madeline was any better. And then the 4 children who came forward after that, the results of his liaisons, they all appeared, Prospero was the youngest, and we see how he's been completely debauched, but so have all the rest. I mean, in their different kinds of ways, and there's there's something kind of depressing about that, I guess. Like, is it just that power and money corrupts? Just that's it, or is it that Roderick in particular just he's taught them all the wrong lessons. He's taught them, you say, sir, yes, sir, which of course was the lesson that the ironically named Griswold taught him.
Yeah, he basically becomes him by the end, right? There's a lot of lines that we hear in flashbacks. His boss say to him, and we know that he says those later to his children. I think you're touching on that. That's where the subtlety lies. I think is where. What ultimately is the evil here? Is it that the money is corrupting, the power is corrupting, or is it more the values that Roderick Usher failed to instill in his children?
Yeah.
Could they have been saved? Could they have turned out good? Because none of them did. They're all awful people at the end of it, and it's tough to feel a lot of sympathy for them as they go down one by one. To varying degrees, you can argue maybe some of them are worse than others, but. You're touching on a lot of stuff I definitely wanted to highlight, so I'll just kind of co-sign on a lot of it. Last week I mentioned how I immediately thought of the Trump family when we were talking about these rich people who never face any consequences.
Yeah.
And then I was definitely smiling to myself when all of that basically gets confirmed as we go through, and it's like not just them, but also other billionaire families and people of power in our country in particular that are leveraging capitalism in a way that feels extremely modern. It is like a modern takedown of American society and American evils from a younger generation looking at an older generation. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I think so. I mean, it functions on so many different levels. I mean, there is this suggestion. It's interesting, that Verna says to it is Madeline. She says to, do you know what Roderick would have been if you hadn't taken the deal? And she's, he would have been a poet, and she says to Freddie, you would have been a dentist. And it's Freddie is the only character she really seems to be pissed off at. Everybody else she sort of bemused, oh well, this is what happens with you people. But Freddie, she seems to take great personal offense to the way that to his cruelty. His cruelty really seems to be what for her pushes him over the edge, and so that he gets the special, he gets the Pit and the Pendulum treatment. Yeah.
I was wondering how we were going to get it.
Continuing from what the first half set up, I feel like the second half really stuck the landing. I do love that touch that each character was told what they, or someone was told what they would have been. And all of that is to say, like, had they not taken the deal, or if Roderick hadn't been their father or something like that. So as John said, like getting into that nature versus nurture scenario, the way that they threaded the Raven and all the stuff with Lenore was really, that was the big reward at the end of all of this, because we see all these characters get what they deserve for the most part. And then we get Lenore, which is that tragic figure from Poe's story, translated here as this character that's strong like Annabelle Lee, has the stubbornness of a Roderick, and the way that she is innocent and she doesn't deserve it, but even the innocence, and you know, if you create the metaphor all the way across, like the boomers, yeah, they've created some people who like did bad shit and they deserve their fate, but also these innocents who had no say in the matter are affected and ultimately die. And you know, there's so many other things that come into play. So seeing Flanagan like tell that story all the way through and carry that metaphor through, I found to be really, you know, it's poignant. And while it maybe it's a little on the nose, it's needed. I think like, you know, audiences, this is like a full takedown of the pharmaceutical industry, billionaire culture, you know, all these different facets of what we've built up as this American empire that's like possibly doomed to fall. So seeing that kind of the fall of the House of Usher and the fall of America as a culture and a society, based on what we've built up, this you know, shaky foundation. I thought it came to fruition really well.
Nobody is spared too. He even loops in, you know, TV and movies. He's like, yeah, if we just took a year off, we could solve all these problems, but we can't. And I was like, oh, all of a sudden I feel culpable. He's drawing us all in and saying, you know, we as a society, as humans, have chosen this to some extent. And then, yeah, there's a, you know, we're getting ahead of ourselves into a final episode, but Madeline, I think, makes the defense argument that you hear so often of like, we're created by the system. We're just providing a service and somebody else would do it. We're just here because the consumers, they're so greedy and they were hungry and we gave them something that they wanted. So it provides a little bit of that, but man, is it a heavy metal takedown of that in general. Yeah, I was cheering it on ultimately, and yeah, it's not subtle, but I don't care. I was having a good time with it.
If Poe is this more subdued side to these versions of the story, this always set out to be, as we talked about last week, the very like heavy metal, blood on the walls, like throwing everything at the wall and being like unabashedly like a horror romp.
Yeah, no, I think, and the thing is that in Poe's stories, you know, if you look at The Mask of the Red Death, which I think is definitely one of the framing narratives for the series as a whole. And also another story called Hop Frog. Poe loves these kind of like elaborate parties that are just, he's always a little iffy because it's the early, you know, it's not even 1850 yet. And he's got to be a little bit careful about what he tells you is going on. But he's like, oh, they out-Heroded Herod. And, you know, there's, yeah, when Prospero says, there's going to be an orgy, that's basically it. You know, it's, yeah. So, I mean, I think that although Poe's language often can seem a little bit reticent, he was fascinated by these kinds of bacchanalian kinds of celebrations, and also by these, you know, in the House of Usher, in the story in the House of Usher, you know, Roderick and Madeline, where basically there's the strong hint of incest. There's the, you know, their family tree is a straight line kind of thing. And so he is kind of fascinated by the sort of habits of the rich and famous. It's just that he views them in a lot of ways through a kind of a Gothic lens. And I think this is actually one of the interesting changes, or you could say something Flanagan brings out maybe, is that this is very much a Gothic story in the sense that Gothics tend to be about the sins of the past making their way into the present, the sins of the parents being visited on the children. I mean, that's absolutely what this show is about, including, as you said, Lenore, most kind of heartbreakingly at the end. I'll be honest. I mean, I get why he had Verna soften the blow for us by saying, oh, your mom's going to do all this great stuff. Part of me just wished, though, that she had just snapped her fingers and Lenore was dead and we were all just like, what? But I think he was a little afraid of throwing us too much out of the narrative.
Yeah, and it does create that interesting side by side, because so much of this story to me is about this like distance people in wealth and power create between themselves and those who suffer because of their actions. And there's a couple moments where we're confronted with, or where Roderick is confronted with the reality of what he's done. But she even says, like, it's impossible to know. It's impossible to know the full reach of your evil. And I think about that all the time for people like this. And you're like, do you know how many lives how many people have suffered because of you and how much death? It's a statistic at a certain point, and there's no way they can reckon with it. And this show, in a way, is like an attempt to make them do that, and in kind of a cathartic way for us as the audience, because I would love for this to be true. I'd love for some avenging Raven figure to come in and you know, bring these people down. And I think Flanagan knows that a majority of people watching the show are probably kind of cheering for that when they at least figure out that that's what's going on. But I thought the Lenore stuff was an interesting counter to that, of like a little bit of good and a little bit, and it grows and it grows and it starts to spread, and before you know it, it actually is a good that is spreading throughout the world that touches an unknown number of people. It was at least providing a counterpoint of like what could be possible for people in power if they can just choose that.
And I guess the point quite often is they have the choice. We see them so often just failing to make that choice. Morella almost makes the choice. I mean, I guess in a sense she does make the choice in that she doesn't go at, like, she goes to the orgy, but she doesn't orge. But on the other hand, she doesn't get out in time either. She doesn't heed the warning. So she's still caught up in the acid rain. Yeah,
what a fucking scene that was, by the way. We touched on that last week. That's going to be, I think, of all the scenes in this series, that's going to stay with me the longest. Absolutely horrifying. And disturbing, and I loved it.
You know, though, funnily enough, I mean, the scene I'm not, that's definitely one of them, but the lemon scene, I do think that's small masterclass in acting and screenwriting. Life gives you lemons. No, you don't make lemonade. Here's what you do. My understanding is that Frank Langella was originally supposed to play the part of Roderick Usher, and then about halfway through got bounced out for inappropriate behavior. But what is the actor's name? The guy who plays Roderick Usher is just fantastic. I mean, Flanagan always gets good performances out of his actors, even great performances out of his actors. And you know, okay, the guy looks a little bit like he's made up to look just a little bit like Edgar Allan Poe with the little mustache and the, you know, and he's married to a woman who could be his child, like his grandchild. Yeah, okay, gotcha, you know. But one of the things I like about Flanagan as a filmmaker is the way that he's willing to let the camera just sit on an actor as they talk, as they give a speech or whatever. The tricky thing about that is the actor has to be able to pull it off. The actor has to be good for it. And if they're not, it's just going to be horrible to watch. But man, he's able just time and time again to pick actors who can deliver on that.
To have to pivot to Bruce Greenwood and to get such a great performance out of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
All these monologues that he has. Carla Gugino throughout has excellent monologues as well. Yeah. Mark Hamill has some great moments where you just get to live with him. Those performances, I think those are the three that really stand out to me, like all things considered at this point.
Although Madeline, you know, she had remarkable presence. She had just is it Madeline Stowe who plays?
Oh, that's Mary McDonnell.
Mary McDonnell. God, all right, sorry Mary. But yeah, she has just, her stage presence or screen presence is just, she's just magnetic. You know, there's just every time she's on the screen, she just commands the screen's attention.
Is that modern day Madeline?
Yeah, modern day Madeline.
I actually really liked the flashback Madeline too, like 1980 era Madeline. I thought she was scary and she had a lot of great moments, honestly, too, of great acting. So
moving in here, I did want to give John the opportunity. We've kind of talked about our history with Poe and all of that, but I wanted to ask, as we move into these Poe adaptations, did you have a favorite story or two that stand out to you that you were excited to see adapted in this series?
You know, it's funny, The Pit and the Pendulum, when I was a kid, like in grade school, we were all obsessed with that story because there was something about just the dynamic of the story. Guy strapped to this slab and the pendulum's coming down, and, you know, for whatever reason, as like, I don't know, you know, 4th and 5th graders, so like 9-10 years old, we were just like beside ourselves with that story. And I don't know if any of us had seen, say, the Corman film or anything like that. I think it was just someone's older brother or parent or something must have told them about it. So I was really curious to see what they were going to do. And throughout the episode, I kept thinking, is it just metaphorical? You know, and then we get to the end and I was like, there it is. There were other things where, I would recognize, okay, this is not, I mean, I was really curious, how are they going to do the Raven? How are they going to handle the Raven? Because the poem is, there's, as I said, this great heartbreaking poem about death being it, that just, that's it, you die and there is never more, you're never going to see Lenore again, she is lost to you, as is everybody who's gone. It's just in some ways a terrifying and kind of poem. So I was curious to see how they were going to sort of try to thread the eye of that needle, because obviously she's one of these beings from Ultima Thule that has come topside. I'll be honest, it wasn't within the scope of the series, but I would love to have seen some kind of flashbacks to what old Arthur Gordon Pym was up to when he was circumnavigating the globe, because I'm sure that's,
I thought we were going to get that. I was a little disappointed too. I mean, I see why they didn't. Probably got cut for time, but I was hoping to see a little glimpse of that.
Well, he was so complicit in everything that it felt like we should have had an episode with his story. And I get it. Again, it's the focus is on the family, but he's the family fixer. He's the guy who greases the wheels. He's always there. So it felt like there should have been something, like he should have gotten his moment too. Fascinatingly, though, he's the only guy who doesn't, or he's the guy who doesn't take the deal. Yeah. And there's a sort of fascinating kind of integrity or something, or canniness about that. No, I've just seen where the deal got my friends. Thanks, but I'll go to jail.
I also thought there was like, it's not a great comparison, but like this sort of honor among thieves thing between him and Verna, where she like respects his decision. She's like, of course you wouldn't take the deal. And he's like, like you said, very savvy and knew that it wouldn't have been worth it in any way. Like whatever the consequence wouldn't have been worth the boon. So, something else that just in speaking about things that were left out of the series that this show is meant to be sort of like Poe's, like all of his work as a whole. And I felt like some of in learning that he is sort of the grandfather of like the modern detective story. I felt like that was never made good on within the series. Like we did have a detective working, but we didn't get the sort of Sherlock-esque Poirot sort of figure solving some sort of mystery in the way that I expected that we might. And the Arthur Pym story is like a globetrotting adventure almost. And that was sort of left out. So it's like, while this does, I think, capture a lot of Poe's work and like his oeuvre, I guess, it does miss like little corners here and there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's the moment when the young Dupin says to Roderick and Annabelle, he does the little, I've made all these observations about you guys, and from these observations I can intuit, you were up all night with the baby, there's 2 cups of coffee, that means you were both up, and so on. And that is the kind of stuff that Dupin and then his literary child, as it were, Sherlock Holmes, would specialize in. But Dupin becomes, he's played as this kind of ironic figure, that he gets all the little details. He can even, get the signature thing, right? And he sees the importance of the little details to build his case, but he completely misses the fact that he's being played, which is heartbreaking for him. So it's like that. Whatever faith Poe might have had or how would I put this? The faith that those stories express in the ability of the detective to get to the bottom of things, the series just completely undercuts. At the end, they have to tell you themselves. Roderick Usher has to say, come meet me at this address and I'll tell you what you want to know.
All right, so moving into the series, episode 5 is called The Telltale Heart. Roderick Madeline and Annabelle Lee join forces with Dupin to uncover Fortunato's hidden files. The surviving Usher children devolve into jealousy over their father's favoritism. Frederick has the hospital discharge Morella into his care. Victorine admits that she forged Allie's signature to hurry Verna's surgery. Dupin admits he lied about the informant's existence to pit the family against each other. After an argument, Tamerlan and Bill break up. Roderick meets Victorine for the heart mesh, but she is distracted by a ticking noise. Her memory then comes back. After Allie said she was going to reveal the corruption behind the Usher family and the heart mesh trial, Victorine threw a bookend at her head, killing her. Desperate, she used the heart mesh on a dead Allie and was driven to madness by the mesh's chirping. Upon realizing this, Victorine commits suicide in front of her father.
What a cool episode. So I mentioned this last week. I think the Telltale Heart was, maybe outside of The Raven, the one that I latched onto the most as a young reader. Absolutely loved the idea of this mad narrator trying to convince us how what he did was not mad. And listen to how calmly I planned this. And like, I love that voice, and I thought it was so striking. And but then at the same time, he's being driven mad by hearing this beating of this heart. And so I was really curious when I got to the Telltale Heart episode, like how is he going to translate this to this modern retelling? I thought this was a pretty cool version of it, right? With the synthetic beating going on, the chirping sound throughout that's haunting Victorine. Yeah, I thought this was a pretty cool one. It's interesting because it changes a lot. So I can see people maybe being a little frustrated with just how much we got away. There's no vulture eye, reference. There's a lot that gets left out from this story, but as like a riff on it, I liked it.
The sound of the heart was particularly squishy. I think you could have, because I think at this point, right, we've all seen any number of shows where we hear the beating of the heart, and I don't even mean just Poe adaptations, but I mean, that's become a sort of dramatic convention. And so I think to turn it to the methodical sound of the little machine is a little stroke. It reframes it for us in a way. There's a way in which it becomes this kind of trope for what they're doing. Everything they're involved in is trying to do, whether it's to remove pain, right? With ligodone, this obviously like oxycodone thing. So it's trying to remove pain to an extent that like is not really practical because the terrible side effects. Or the AI thing. We're going to replace you with a bot, but it's like it's immortality. And now in this case, we're going to keep your heart just sort of beating. What's interesting is there is no old man, but in Poe's story, the narrator says, I didn't want his gold. Of course, the moment he says that, we're like, oh, he had gold, did he? And there's a lot, $200 million, I think it is, right? Is at stake here. And so there's a lot obviously going on for Vic psychologically and whatever. But as with that narrator, there is this suggestion that money has a part to play here. I think what is harder to say here is in Poe's story, there's the sense, right, that the narrator has gone mad and is hearing either his own heartbeat or is hallucinating that he's hearing the heartbeat. Here, it seems that Verna is the one who's making that heartbeat sound. The very last scene where Verna places the little heart pocket on top of Vic's headstone, right? So it seems that Verna has always had some kind of connection with that. I mean, at the end when Roderick hears it, that's because it's on Verna's partner's dead heart. But even the end with Vic committing suicide, I mean, in a sense, I think the narrator at the end of the Telltale Heart basically says, yeah, they're getting ready to hang me. I think. I could be wrong about that. But in confessing and tearing up the floorboards and saying, there he is, right? I mean, that's an act of self-destruction. And Vic does something similar in front of her father. She destroys herself.
Yeah, I like that you reframed it that way, because I didn't, when I watched the episode initially, I was like, wow, there's no moment of admitting guilt, really. I mean, a suicide is a form of that, right? It's that's the guilt persona taken to the point that she can no longer handle it. But the Telltale Heart, when I read it, the moment of going so insane that you show the evidence and you like present it to the police there, it was such a departure that I was like, man, this is a very different episode. And I felt like it suffered a little bit. Not that I felt like it was a bad episode, but it suffered from, I think, doing a lot of heavy lifting, setting up the rest of the stories. Every single episode, I think, sets out to, in some way, set up the other stories. They're simultaneously doing like all of these stories, and then each episode focuses in on one. This one felt like it did so much heavy lifting for episodes 6 and 7 that it was like the very end of the episode, and maybe a few chunks throughout, really featured the Telltale Heart as a story. But getting to the part where Allie, she throws the bookend at Allie, and just how gruesome and brutal that is. It's one of those things where I wonder if you hadn't read Poe. I think the show rewards people who've read Poe and who are familiar, which is most audiences. But if you hadn't, are you really getting like sort of the the morality of the Telltale Heart from this. I don't think that you're getting all of it, but it's a fun interpretation for those who have read it.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting is Poe wrote a story called The Imp of the Perverse. Almost like the first, I don't know, 2/3 of the story is an essay, a kind of a philosophical essay about that part of ourselves that just makes us do stupid stuff, and stuff against our own self-interest. And in this story, spoiler alert, people, for a story that's like, whatever, almost 200 years old, a guy commits the perfect murder, and he gets away with it. There's no one is ever going to find out. And at the end of the story, he runs outside and starts shouting, "I did it. I killed this guy." That there's just something about us that kind of turns in on us. And for him, that's that, sort of imp of the perverse, this kind of urge to self-destruction or self-sabotage that we all have. And you could certainly see that, especially in Vic and Tammy's cases. I think you could make that you could maybe make that case more than with any of the others, possibly. I'd have to think a little bit more about that, but it feels like it.
Vic is one who seems to feel a little bit of guilt, so you get a little bit of that. Like you could, it's like she almost accidentally killed Allie. Like you could say, she threw a heavy object at her, something bad was bound to happen, but it didn't seem like she intended to kill her. And then the guilt over what she's done, she mutilated the body and tried to, hook this thing up to the heart, but was that some sort of like madness of trying to save the life?
I think so. I think so. Yeah,
bring her back. Yeah. And then she's like clearly compartmentalized it and kind of shut it out and trying to go on, but then she keeps hearing it and it keeps drawing her back. So in some ways, I think he is touching on that guilt, and I think that's what ultimately makes, like, I love that about Poe's stories, and I like believing that that's the case, and that in the world that bad people will be driven mad by their own guilt, and Poe returns to that so often. Even The Black Cat is a story that's very similarly structured, where it's just like I can't just shut up. I have to reveal the fact that I've committed a crime. But I do think that also kind of puts it into a fantasy territory for me, whereas I have my doubts about the real world and whether or not people who do some of this heinous shit are actually capable of feeling guilt and actually capable of being haunted by their choices, or if they just sleep like babies because they are sociopaths. I don't know.
Well, I think you're right that Vic seems of possibly of all of them the one with something like a conscience. The others seem just concerned largely about not getting caught. I killed my boyfriend's cat. It's, in which I don't remember doing, but I killed the cat, and I have to hide the evidence of that, and I'll spend whatever it takes, right? Vic Vic wants to succeed. She's impatient, to put it mildly, and of course it's her test chimp that fills out or brings us the murders in the Rue Morgue. Although I think in Poe's story it's an orangutan, but orangutan, chimpanzee. I'm an American. Do I even know the difference between these things? Yeah.
In this episode, there's this great moment when Augie and Pym are together, and there's a reference to Ingmar Bergman, and with the chessboard near the beach. I believe that Augie says that all we need is a chessboard and a beach or something like that to Pym, like referencing Seventh Seal. I love that Flanagan is having fun here with film, obviously, and that's clearly a film that he loves, but referencing death and then the embodiment of death that's in Seventh Seal, and then drawing that parallel over here to this adaptation and what we get in Verna, who is the Raven or an embodiment of death, is also another cool connection that I had to mention before we move to it.
And even Pym himself, the Pym Reaper, right? He is this sort of minor death figure who keeps running around, bring me her eyes. Oh, okay, no problem.
We also get the first mention of something that I can open the floor now to you two, so I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. Where in a flashback, I believe it was, Verna calls Madeline Cleopatra. Says, "Oh, my Cleopatra." And then later on, there's the whole thing where she's like, "You don't know who I am." She like breaks her neck. Which seemed almost superhuman to me. I don't know if it was intended to be or not, but it posed the question for me, like, is Madeline more than she seems to be? Is she some sort of otherworldly figure? I thought it was like kind of ambiguous. You could read it that way, but I'm wondering if either you read it that way, or do you think she's just Roderick's sister, human, same as Roderick, or did you see something more with her?
I just took her for what she was as a human and the sister, but I like where you're going because ultimately where Roderick says that she's a goddess and treats her to a goddess's funeral or to a, I guess a pharaoh's funeral or whoever it was. Yeah. That's kind of cool. That kind of aligns with some of the stuff you're talking about there.
Yeah, I thought that she was a human, but a terrifying human. It's very, for all that people break necks in movies and stuff, it's actually very hard to do, which is a relief to me. It's very hard to snap someone's neck like that. But if anybody could, Madeline Usher could. And I thought that, and what's interesting is that having done that, she then apologizes. Mm-hmm. She's like Pym in his dealings with Verna. She makes her move, and Verna says, "Well, yeah, I guess you had to try." And then Madeline says, "Okay, that didn't work. I apologize. Let's." So it's this sort of fascinating combination, I guess, of savagery and manners. And as if one just rides right on top of the other.
I also took that to be Madeline pivoting right away and sort of scheming like, oh, I apologize. Hopefully we can get back on better terms and make a deal here or something like that.
Yeah. I think so.
Self-preservation kicks in. Because I kind of took it that way too, is that it's like, I am now realizing I am being faced with something supernatural, something beyond humans. This is kind of the reality is setting in for these characters in this moment. And all of a sudden, they don't have the power anymore. And as soon as they don't have the power anymore, oh, I'm sorry, I mistreated you. Let's talk reasonably.
Yeah, it's after they both tried to kill her, and then it doesn't work, and that's when they realize, oh, okay. And
I can't deal with this like I deal with all the other problems I deal with.
Yeah, that whereas Roderick keeps denying, right? And the meetings keep saying this is all bullshit. This is, you guys are falling for this. They accept it. As soon as they're faced with it, they just accept it as it's what we need to accept to continue on through the next part of the next 10 minutes or whatever it is. I do want to add, though, that I called it with Dupin. After about episode 2 or 3, I thought, you know what? I bet there isn't an informant. I bet he's just setting them all against each other. And when he said there isn't an informant, I was like, yeah.
I think, James, you said that in our last episode, if I remember correctly.
I think I at least floated the question. I wasn't confident, but yeah.
Yeah.
Right on, James.
Before we leave this episode behind, I did want to point out one moment I thought was really cool, and it was the Roderick is sort of fantasizing about jumping out of the window and falling to his death. He doesn't end up doing it, and he gets called, weak by Verna. She says, "I wish you had done it." But the moment where he turns around and then the skyline starts, I guess, rising because it looks like he's falling, and we see the wind blowing on. I just thought this was a cool. I mean, it's probably on a virtual stage. James, you'd know better than I would, but
I noticed quite a bit of that actually being used. Yeah,
I thought the effect looked really cool, and ultimately was something I hadn't seen before, which I'm always on the lookout for stuff like that.
Well, and it sets up or it looks forward, right, to the rain of bodies at the end, right? That there's a sort of visual continuity.
And that absolutely the anything that when they were looking out of those skyscrapers, that was a virtual stage, especially the bodies falling. I noticed, but it's still such a strong filmmaking tool that why wouldn't you use it in that scenario?
I'm glad it's virtual because with all those extras, come on, man.
Yeah.
Listen, it's a great gig. It's a Mike Flanagan thing. You want in or don't you? Sure. What do I have to do?
Worth it.
Right. Yeah. First, you got to get naked. Then you're going to go to the top of this very tall building. Mark Hamill is going to push you off. Luke Skywalker, of course.
So moving into episode 6 here, Goldbug. In the present, Tamerlane deals with hallucinations from insomnia and her breakup with Bill as she prepares to launch her wellness package, Goldbug. Madeline tries to convince Roderick that Verna is a threat after his children's mounting death count, trying to remind him of their deal with her back in 1980, though Roderick is in denial. She also pushes her scientists to develop an AI for consciousness mapping. Pym uncovers Verna's links to prominent families, impossibly dating back hundreds of years. Morella begins speaking, leading Frederick to drug her back into silence, still believing she had been unfaithful. Lenore grows concerned when her father does not bring the specialists he'd promised for her mother. At Goldbug's launch, Tamerlane is rattled by hallucinations of Verna and a sex tape of her, Bill, and an escort. She accidentally injures Juno, and Madeline spots Verna, who turns to dust before her eyes. At home, Verna taunts Tamerlane through mirrors, which she smashes until the shards of glass impale and kill her.
We read the stories along with this as we were going. I had never read Goldbug before. This was my first time reading this story. It was probably my least favorite Poe story I think I've read. Maybe I'm missing something, but I found it pretty dull throughout. It features a lot of this cryptography stuff, which I read later that he, I guess, was famous for doing some of these kinds of stories. They were very popular at the time, apparently. He got paid the most for this story of any one sale he made in his lifetime. He made $100 for it. That was his biggest single sale. I thought that was an interesting note, considering I didn't like it very much. It also had a figure, a character who was really just offensive, racist stereotype. I think even for the time, but definitely now through the lens of time for sure.
And this may be the record for the most racist story that we've read on the podcast. Like
that's bold. We've read some bad ones.
We've read some bad ones, but that one, it was everything about the character. I was like, oh my God, this is very off-putting.
What a strange one to choose here, because ultimately it doesn't really have a ton to do with the story we see, other than like sort of the obsession with treasure that and the acquiring of wealth and sort of a larger way, unless I'm missing something. I'm curious to know, what did you think, John? What do you think of Goldbug the story and how it relates to this episode?
I agree with you guys that it was as if they couldn't resist Goldbug. They couldn't resist that title, but the connection to the Poe story is a little bit hard to see.
There's
as
a box
you said,
at one point that you open up and there's treasure in it.
Yeah, I mean that was all I could figure was that there's the box, and that the box is a treasure just for you. The thing is that it's sort of individually tailored treasure. The thing is, as I recall in Poe's story, it's like Captain Kidd's treasure, so there's a little bit, oh, we finally found it, but it's and there's the sort of the ciphers, but the ciphers don't really. I mean, I was thinking, to the ciphers, could you argue that Verna is a cipher for Raven, so I guess that's there. But there's never a moment where any of the characters is like, wait a minute. So it seemed to me, Tamerlane is named after, I think it's the earliest of Poe's like sort of poetic successes. This poem called Tamerlane, and he writes two versions of it. He writes a version, I think, when he's like 17, which is like 400 lines ballpark long. And then a few years later, he publishes a version that's not quite half as long, but he's cut a lot out of it. And he takes this middle, like sort of Eurasian conqueror named Tamerlane the Great, who is sort of dropped out of our, I think, of Western culture in a lot of ways. He made an appearance in a series of Russian movies more than a few years ago, the Night Watch films, Night Watch, Day Watch, and Tamerlane actually has this historical bit involving him in one of those. But by and large, he's not a figure that is that, I think, familiar to us. And in Poe's story, in the narrative, I guess you would say, of Poe's poem, Tamerlane basically chooses power and wealth over love. And that seems to be very much what Tamerlane has done. She's chosen her built program, the Goldbug box, all that, over this guy who actually really seems to care for her. He's like, man, I really don't want to have sex with all these other women. I just want to be with you. And there's like another layer of irony under that, in that she's clearly obsessed with the Goldbug launch and what have you. But, she's wearing this vivid green dress to during that second part of or that part of the show. And I thought, duh, the jealousy, the green-eyed monster, that mocks the meat it feeds on. So I thought, okay, so she's intensely jealous but she can't admit that, jealousy is a loss of control, isn't it? And her thing seems to be about just utter control over everything in her environment, down to she will control, like, she's controlling the box that you're going to get that has all these little things in it just for you. And so yeah, the destruction of the mirrors, I mean, talk about a kind of an image for self-destruction. That yeah, it's not a pretty way to die. I mean, not that any of them are. It's not, maybe it's not as bad, and maybe it takes a backseat to Prospero, but
Yeah.
it's still pretty bad.
Yeah, I love that you signaled that the green dress, because the green dress, and especially that final scene where she is smashing the mirrors, the green neon coming from the street, evoked that Hitchcock Vertigo look.
Yeah.
Then smashing of the mirrors, and because we saw a clip of her before her death has actually been shown, and her face was all cut up and her neck seemed to be doing something, and I was like, what possibly can happen here?
I thought the same thing. Yeah, I was like, what's gonna happen? I also thought, oh my God, that's a lot of bad luck. Come
Right.
on.
Yeah, right. How many years is that?
Right, exactly.
That final scene being about smashing mirrors and then using that green motif, I thought was really, it was really evoking a different story here. And that's, I think, what Luke was getting to, is that this story is completely unlike the original Poe story. So I just wonder, like, why not just call it Tamerlane if that was the...
Yeah, I think Tamerlane would have been, for me, that would have been better. Yeah, and I don't know if it was just something the Tamerlane thing was something they just wanted to weave in or whatever. I mean, you could argue that it's ironic in the same way that Dupin is an ironic figure. The Goldbug, the sort of mystery plot, is treated ironically in that she completely misses the mystery, the mystery of love. She completely misses that to focus on her product launch, and then knocks out her poor stepmother. I mean, that poor woman, she was like sort of like for sort of very dry comic relief at points.
Yeah, she provided a good comic relief. So I like this show overall. I've been singing its praises throughout. I will admit, this was the episode where I felt like it was starting to fall into a bit of a repetitive cycle, to where this felt very familiar. We're going to see the death of one of the children. We're going to slowly progress some of the other storylines. I will admit there's a couple of scenes that really stood out, like when we start learning about Verna and we're seeing all these different figures, and she's in all these photos. I mostly like that. Like, again, it's very heavy-handed. I almost didn't need it. Like, I could have kind of interpreted that that's the case and that she works with all these people, but to see her literally in a picture with Mitch McConnell, and
right,
you know what I mean? Like, it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're going really make sure nobody misses the message here.
Right.
But ultimately, like, it was still a good episode. But yeah, this is where I was like, all right, we're setting up the penultimate episode, and I hope that Flanagan will take this and start to twist it more and start to sort of break it apart and do something more interesting with it as we go forward. And I think he did do that. But here, this was one of my least favorite episodes in the series, which I thought was ironic considering it was definitely my least favorite stories that we read. But yeah, still good.
Yeah, no, the funny thing is I actually thought the actress's portrayal really, for me, really anchored it and really made it just kind of hit home. It's interesting that those, because the Black Cat is episode 4, right?
Yes.
Because and there you have Leo having these gaps in his memory and gaps in time. And then you get the same thing with Vic in The Telltale Heart, and now you get the same thing with Tammy in this, and in her case it's because of sleep deprivation. In Leo's case, too many drugs. In Vic's case, it's murder. But there's this return, I guess, to I think one of Poe's central fascinations, which is with sort of altered states of consciousness, and with and this is I think something that comes very much out of British romanticism. He's getting this. I mean, he's a big fan of Byron and to a certain extent Coleridge, and I think he's getting this in part from their stuff as well. But what Flanagan does is to take it's blanks. It's just you. What did I do? I don't know what I did. There's something, I mean, the wall, in a sense, behind which Griswold is chained. That's a kind of emblem for that, right? There's this blank surface, and there's something behind that. And whatever it is not good.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say with the whole green room thing was it's also, we talk about the Mask of the Red Death and how there's all those colored rooms. And I'm just realizing that like that's a Poe, I feel like, almost signature. That's almost like a
Yeah.
something that you can look to many of his stories as like
Well,
colors evoking emotions.
we mentioned that in the Haunting of Hill House. Also, that might have been an inspiration that Shirley Jackson was drawing on for having the different rooms of the house be these different primary colors. That goes right back to the Mask of the Red Death, where they travel through all these different rooms. And I definitely noticed that a lot of these different scenes have like a primary color largely associated with it.
Yeah.
This being the green one this episode. But I think I think the Pit and the Pendulum scene was very blue. Like there's certain moments that have a lot of certain color to them.
So episode 7 is called The Pit and the Pendulum. Madeline tries to convince Pym to elect her as CEO after Roderick is pushed out due to his illness. She wishes to pivot Fortunato to a tech company focusing on artificial immortality. Frederick, now hooked on Leo's cocaine, continues to torture a helpless Morella. In 1979, Roderick betrays Tupon at the court hearing to take down Fortunato, saving the company and earning its gratitude. Shocked and disappointed, his wife Annabelle Lee leaves him. In the present, Roderick refuses Juno's request to get off Ligadone, admitting he only married her because he was fascinated by her body's affinity for the drug. She leaves him too. Frederick enters the building where Perry died prior to it being bulldozed. He snorts cocaine and collapses. Werner reveals that she pushed him to add Morella's paralytics to the cocaine. As the demolition begins, she explains she would have used an easier method of death, but chose this because of his decision to torture Morella. The collapsing infrastructure forms a pendulum that bisects Frederick. He can see and feel it happening. Lenore rescues her mother and calls the police. Madeline thinks she can save herself if Roderick dies and convinces him to overdose on Ligadone. Verna, however, does not allow him to die just yet.
I had read the Pendulum many years ago, but I wanted to return to it, so I read it right before watching this episode. This time reading it, it made me think about all of the, like an entire genre of film we have now. People call it the torture porn, something
Sure.
like Saw, something like Hostel, right? There's all these different movies where it's like some elaborate device, you're trapped in it. There's an inherent, like, will they be able to escape? Will they be able to escape their fate? What kind of horrors are going to be, enacted upon them? And I was like, did Poe kind of invent this story too? Because that's kind of what it felt like reading it, honestly. It was a very elaborate torture mechanism. He's in, like, the Inquisition has, like, captured him, is what it is, if I remember correctly. And he gets out of one thing only to be in another situation where he's now going to get pushed into the pit. And, like, there's the walls are closing in, and it's very elaborate. And I don't know. What do you think? Is this an early case of that kind of story?
I think so. I'm asking myself, Wilkie Collins has a man, he's got some kind of story that's but see, Collins was after Poe and read Poe. What is the name of the Collins story? It's about a bed, I think, a haunted bed. Anyway, I think, yeah, Poe may be at the very beginning of this kind of at least prose version of this story. I mean, you go back to Greek mythology and go back to someone like Theseus, in the same way that there were the labors of Hercules, there were the labors of Theseus, and there's not as many, and they're not completely really as exciting. But one of the things that he does is he kind of cleans up the road into, I think it's Athens. There are all these different robbers, and some of them are just kind of boring robbers. But then there were others. There's one guy who has the bed, and he's like, oh, sleep in my bed for the night. And if you're too big, he shortens you, and if you're too short, he lengthens you. And there's another guy who's like, come over here, and he stakes you out, and he ties you to your hands to one sapling that he's bent over, and your feet to another sapling that he's bent over, and then he cuts the strings, and they fly apart, and they tear you apart. So I mean, there are stories that or elements in stories, right, like this. But the Pit and the Pendulum strikes me as the first I can think of, or one of the first I can think of anyway. No, it is really the first I can think of that just foregrounds that. That's the point of the story, is like the sort of horrors, to a certain extent, the horrors of the Inquisition. There's an argument about Gothic forms that they are, in a sense, Protestant forms that arise in response to Catholicism, a sort of threat of Catholicism. And I think I sometimes think that interpretation is overstated, but I do think in this case it's a reasonable argument to make that these are the horrors of the Inquisition, that they're not just going to kill you, they're going to let the pendulum just, they're going to like sort of break you psychologically, and then even after you escape, they cheat. like
Yeah.
it's not like,
He's gonna get
there's
burned
not like,
or something too was gonna happen in that story.
yeah, the walls are hot
Yeah.
so they're, oh, you thought you just escaped that, Batman. You know so there is it's a kind of a horror thing, and it's also I think a sort of oblique indictment of that kind of religiosity.
I have two things. The first is anytime the Spanish Inquisition is mentioned, I always think of Monty Python.
Exactly.
How can you not?
Exactly. No one was expecting it, and yet
Yeah.
here it is, right?
Yes. And the other is like you, John. This was the Poe story in addition to the Raven. When I read this story I think I was probably like 12 or 13. I was introduced to like what classic literature, like Poe, what it could contain as in substance. Like I was blown away. I was like, I can't believe that this is such a graphic story. It's such a scary story. It's got like this twist ending at the very last second where it is happier, but you don't, the whole time you assume that he's gonna either die to the pendulum or die to the pit. And for whatever reason, that really stuck with me. I thought often about Poe and the pit and the pendulum, and like Luke said, this fascination that we have, and with it, Poe possibly being one of the early people to write this, he's so on the cutting edge of like the taboo. And this is that. It's like people are fascinated with the grotesque. People are fascinated with like what human beings will do to one another, and how that evil can at times be worse than any other horror entity, cosmic entity. And I just remember this story being a big moment for me in reading these kinds of stories.
Or I just have to say, the cutting edge, really.
Yeah, right. I had to stop myself earlier from saying that your book, The Fisherman, really hooked me at the very beginning. I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard that.
Me in. Yeah. No, I think you're right that almost nobody likes rats. We had pet rats once upon a time. They were lovely, but most people, when I tell them that, are utterly horrified. And so not only is there the pendulums, the blade swinging down, but there's also the rats, which are of course going to be his saviors and all this kind of stuff. But so yeah, it definitely pushes buttons. It's definitely I think Poe, looking for what Stephen King calls, psychic pressure points. Oh, how do you feel about a big blade swinging over you? Oh, that bothers you? Would rats make it worse? Oh.
And they do a lot of that kind of foreshadowing in the episode too. We have the cattail going back and forth. We hear that Freddy is the swing vote. I thought was interesting. You're the swing vote.
Nice. Yeah,
the board's swinging, is it? I thought he kept coming back to that image, foreshadowing what his fate was going to be. Although I will admit, I kept expecting it to be something where he was going to be doing it to his wife, and then he was going to get caught in it somehow. Because they were setting up this, like, he was torturing her essentially, like, I was like, oh man, he really turned too. And I think they recognized that there was a little bit of, like, he's kind of a pitiful character early on.
He's got a man bun, for God's sake. I mean, right there. Poor Henry Thomas. That is devotion to your craft. If you're like, you know what, I'll wear the man bun. Okay, let's do it.
I live in the land of the man buns. I can't cast any shade. But
okay, all right.
No, but it's not a particularly flattering one. I will grant that. It is. I thought this was a really cool episode. Honestly, this kind of brought it back for me. I liked that both Dupin and Roderick call out the whole script of the thing. They're like, well, this is the part where you do this, and Dupin's like, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. This is where I walk back to the seat, and Roderick's like, I'm not really in control of this whole thing, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And I felt like it got a little bit meta. This is where it felt a little bit postmodern to me, and I like it when it gets into that territory too, because it freshened up what had become a familiar pattern we were getting with every episode.
Before this, I mean, Tammy is not exactly likable, but she's kind of sympathetic in a way. And Vic, same thing, is kind of sympathetic, and Leo is kind of sympathetic, but when you get to Freddy, he's just a dick, and I think that's the thing, is he slides into this kind of banal evil, Roderick is capable of these kind of, inspiring or impressive speeches, whereas Freddy is just cruel. And so, you had I thought with Morella being wrapped up that way, it did remind me of Ligeia, where you have the narrator's second wife who is bound in funeral vestments at the end, and or funeral, not vestments, but habiliments, I guess, at the end, and then is reborn as his first wife, or he's crazy. I mean, take your pick. And I thought that might be where they were going with that. But then, of course, the removing of the teeth, that's Bernice. Except that in Poe's story, Bernice, there's like this weird erotic thing going on with those teeth that's really kind of creepy and maybe doesn't bear thinking about too much, but it's there. Whereas here it's cruelty. Here it's just torture. And so if we had any sympathy left for Frederick, I mean, we've just lost it.
It's gone there. And I agree. To me, Frederick, he's pitiful at first, but once he moves into this territory, yeah, he's irredeemable. He gets what he deserves. He's full Donald Trump Jr. at this point, I think, where it's yeah, just no
the
pity
coke,
for this
yeah.
guy. Yeah. Well, and also just like a lesser version of the father, and it's just like you have nothing going for you. I did love. There's a particular line I wanted to shout out here where Roderick is talking with June, and she calls him a monster, and he says, "No, dear, I'm Victor Frankenstein. You're the monster." I thought that was a really good line. We've covered Frankenstein in the past, so I always love it when it comes full circle to an older project. But she's his like project. She's his proof of concept. Though I love that there's this ongoing lie about it not being addictive, even though everybody knows it is, including the doctor, who's like clearly like on the payroll of them, so he doesn't want to admit it. He kind of has to whisper even when he dares to say anything that goes against that company line.
He's petulant, right? He's just a child. Everything he's doing, he's just spoiled his whole life. He hasn't had to actually work for any of the stuff that he's got. And I think this has been mentioned already in this episode, but I love how Veronat says to Freddie that Roderick failed you, but it's still no excuse for being the way that you are. And that like finally like that being said, and like that's all the children up to this point. And also pointing to all these other people who are children of billionaires and things like that too. It's like you don't have to follow in the same footsteps that these people are taking. Like you can take ownership of it at some point and still be a good person, but you choose, more often than not, it's the path of least resistance. So you choose to follow in the cruelty or the whatever else is being done.
So many of them fall right into that trap. And what is Flanagan saying by the fact that only Lenore is the only one who seems to be redeemable, and when all the other ones fall right into it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I mean, I guess I was thinking that what happens to Freddie is also like the Black Cat. The narrator of the Black Cat is an alcoholic, and so it's the dangers of the demon rum kind of thing, and his characters. Who is there? Somebody else who does some laudanum. I'm sure there's a few. So I mean, what happens to Freddie in some ways? Yeah, it's both Donald Trump Jr., but then it's also more generally speaking, that Poe concern with people who are in obsessive states of consciousness, and what else is addiction, and so and he never, it's interesting. Freddie never spaces. Well, I guess he spaces putting in the nightshade stuff into his coke, but that's supernatural intervention right there. What seems to happen with everybody else is more like sort of cognitive or something, as if the disease that's affecting their father is in some way, as if they all have like early onset versions of it or something like that, which I guess would be the sort of naturalistic explanation, because the show plays with that a lot. It probably could have gotten away without having Verna there and still justified a lot of it by just saying, well, these are people who are just they're sleep deprived, they're on various substances. This is all just the product of the brain.
That's a really interesting point to bring up, because I love horror stories that are ambiguous like that. That you're at the end, you're often like, was it really supernatural, or was there something else going on? And we're getting an unreliable story, we're getting unreliable narration. And this story, it keeps providing some sort of fuel for that fire, some opportunities for us to see it that way. But I do think Flanagan abandons it at a certain point. and kind of puts all his cards on the table and says, this is actually supernatural. And that's a choice. You know, he leans into that unsubtle nature of it. This is the message. This is what you're seeing. I guess I'm a little bit divided on whether or not I think that's stronger, because I miss a little bit of the ambiguity and kind of would have liked a little bit of that. I would have liked to have a debate on here with you two about how true, how real was this? Whereas I don't think there's much of a debate to be had that this was supernatural throughout. Perhaps preying on some real psychological things that were occurring in each character, you know, kicking them up a notch with like Roderick, for example, making his hallucinations play out. But then even that is said to be like, no, this isn't hallucinations. You're actually being haunted by your dead children. So it kind of comes out and says, no, this is supernatural.
Yeah, and he says that the ghosts have given him all this information that he's relaying. You know, I mean, fair enough. At a certain point, Dupin is like, wait, how do you know all that? You can't know all this stuff. And their ghosts have told me. And of course, I kept thinking too that I was waiting for Dupin to say, you know, you're just setting up an insanity defense. That's why you've had me over here to tell me all this stuff, because you know that no court, like any court is going to listen to this. Any jury is going to listen to this and think this man is insane. He's telling me about the ghosts of his children. He's telling me he knows these things he can't possibly know, and that a good lawyer like Pym would say are absolute speculation, you know, inadmissible. And so on. But yeah, but it never, but I guess there's a limit. You know, I have to be fair to Flanagan, right? There's only so much you can cram into, you know, your 8-hour miniseries, right? So
the whole series really, but especially in these final episodes, we get a lot of recitations of Poe's actual words, mostly from poetry, some often through Roderick, who's quoting it, but Verna recites a poem at one point, not in its entirety, but at least large chunks of it. As a Poe fan, I like it. I like hearing the words. I like hearing poetry. I think it's something that we don't hear a lot these days, and I was glad to see it in a major show like this. But part of me kept wondering if this is getting a little too fan servicey at a moment. I'm like, what is this doing for the non-Poe reader? Is it working for them? Because we get a good chunk of it. I guess I'm of two minds. I think where I ultimately fall is I'm a fan of it. I like it. But I can see the arguments against it. So I'm curious what you two thought of the inclusion of all the poetry.
What was weird about it to me is I thought, so this is a universe where Edgar Allan Poe does not exist.
I kept thinking that too.
Yeah, right. Because when he says, you know, Annabelle Lee, blah, 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 and that's original in this. That's original to him. No one has ever, she's not like, oh, you and your Edgar Allan Poe. No, you know,
she calls him Shakespeare.
Right. There's never a moment where somebody is like, isn't it funny we got this crazy Gothic name? You know, like there's none of that. So I'm always happy to have poetry included anywhere, you know, and I've come to appreciate Poe's poetry a lot more as I said, as I've gotten older. But I think the poem that Verna recites actually kind of works for Verna because it's this cryptic kind of poem. You know, the Annabelle Lee poem is very much like the da 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 da, you know, and whereas the City in the Sea is much more sort of cryptic and kind of like the kind of thing an immortal might enjoy memorizing and puzzling over.
I went and looked it up a little bit, and apparently that poem is all, because I've read it before, but it's been a long time, but it's apparently about a personification of death that rules over a city. So I thought interesting choice to have this character reciting it, right?
Yeah.
I actually like rewound it and shut my eyes and listened to the poem a second time. And I that's kind of the conclusion that I came to as well. And I was like, man, that's such a cool way of having this death personified character sort of tell this story. But I also couldn't help but think like, man, people must just be, whenever they have a conversation with Roderick or Verna, they must just think they're so brilliant because they're just like, they're coming up with these masterworks that Poe has created off the top of their head. And they're just like, oh, this is just something I thought of in the moment just now. Right. And I guess that gives some credence to her saying that Roderick would have been a poet because he's so poetic in the way that he says some of this stuff.
Yeah. And that's the way they can explain it. I think Annabelle Lee is like, that's a lovely poem. I really liked it when I read that one. That one to me, the fact that he kept returning to it, it worked a little less well. I don't know, something about getting these just little chunks of it aren't as effective as like kind of being under its whole spell when you read it as a poem. Whereas like the For Annie poem that the priest is reading, like reciting, like I thought that worked really well. There's a scene we're about to get to in the final episode where we're getting the Raven being quoted. I thought that was a cool scene and it worked. So really, I think it was just the Annabelle Lee one that didn't quite land, just because we kept getting little chunks of it and we never really got I don't think anyone walks away really getting a sense for what that poem is. You're just getting a little taste of it here and there.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that as a Poe fan, I don't know how audiences will react to it, not if they weren't familiar with his work, but as a Poe fan, I actually really enjoyed hearing it for the most part. And it's almost like getting like a music video for a poem or something like that, the way that Flanagan sets it up in ways.
Yeah. And she's so striking, and her delivery is so it's shot so well, and her delivery is so fine. Yeah. It is something to see. I kept thinking too that there was something, he mentions he quotes Annabelle Lee, and he also obviously quotes the Raven, and these are both poems about death, where death has just kind of happened, that which is a very early 19th century kind of thing. People just they God, they got pneumonia and they died, let alone tuberculosis and whatever else, and these are poems in which suffering it's part of human existence. It's part of what happened, and so therefore so is grief, and so they're both very much poems of grief and of mourning, and there's some way in which those poems, their concerns are kind of at tension with what Fortunato Pharmaceuticals is all about. You don't have to suffer, you don't have to, and Madeline, you don't have to die even, or at least a sort of a cheap copy of you can live on.
I love that. Let's get into the final one.
Yeah, so episode 8 is called The Raven. In 1979, Griswold makes Roderick his right-hand man after he saves the company at the court hearing. On New Year's Eve, Madeline and Roderick serve Griswold poison Amontillado and wall him into the basement, murdering him. They plan to frame him and have Roderick replace him on the board, taking over Fortunato. The siblings spend time at Verna's bar to establish an alibi and make a deal for her for wealth and power. In exchange, the Usher bloodline will die right before the siblings do, who will die together. In the present, Verna offers Pym a deal of immunity for his crimes, but he refuses. Verna regrets having to kill the innocent Lenore and reveals that her mother will form a beneficent foundation in her name before granting Lenore a peaceful death. Verna had then instructed Roderick to call Dupin to confess. Before doing so, Roderick had invited Madeline to the old house where he killed her and replaced her eyes with sapphires to give her a queenly send-off. After Roderick finishes confessing, a blind and deranged Madeline emerges from the basement, revealed to have only appeared dead like their mother, and strangles Roderick, causing the house to collapse. Juno inherits and dissolves Fortunato, creating a drug rehab foundation. Pym is arrested and Dupin retires. Verna leaves a token on each Usher grave while reciting Poe's Spirits of the Dead.
Let's circle through and talk about some of the stuff we haven't already touched on, because we've got ahead of ourselves in some cases. I really liked the line from Annabelle Lee in the past where she tells Madeline, "You are so small." And much like what we've seen with Roderick, where like people they're taking these lines and then repurposing them. She takes it, she writes it on the brick. And she points that at Griswold, and it's like, this was so painful when someone said it to me, even though I kind of shrugged it off. Clearly, it stuck with her because she's using it now. And this, by the way, was something that I called, I think, in our first episode when we talked about this. I said, I think we're getting Fortunato as the character Fortunato from the Castle of Amontillado in this Griswold character who's going to be dressed up as this jester, because there was the talk of the bells in the story and him being kind of in motley. And I was happy to see we were right on with that one.
Michael Trucco played Rufus Griswold, and he was so hateable. And he
as was his namesake. Yeah.
Yeah. And he did such a great job of setting up this character that I wanted to see his downfall. And getting to see the Castle of Amontillado play out in the ways that we assumed it might was a lot of fun. I mean, and it was just as brutal, and getting the characters back and forth was worth the price of having that scene in there, because we get to see Madeline and Roderick sort of get their just desserts as they're putting him into this wall. And
yeah, just it kind of it echoes, right? The echoes happen. It's interesting, right, that they've spiked Griswold's drink, but there's also the sense that they're happy that he's going to live just long enough to know what they're doing to him. because and so when Roderick spikes Madeline's drink, um, he uses does he use the wrong amount on purpose, or is he just not as good as Madeline was? There's an interesting kind of symmetry there, but what the symmetry means, I'm not sure. Is there some on Roderick's part? He says, "Oh, Madeline, you're doing everything you have to do. Don't worry about it, deposing me, all this kind of stuff." But is there also a little bit of anger and resentment there as well? And I think what surprised me was we got the brain hook, that ancient Egyptian implement, and I knew that as soon as we got the eyes, the sapphire eyes, I thought, okay, so number one, he's pissed off a goddess. He's removed. He's stolen the eyes of a goddess. That never goes well. And Poe has this kind of obsession with classical, Rome, Greece, and Egypt as well. These for him, I think, are real touchstones. So the Egyptian references worked, right? But with the nose hook, I thought, well, he takes the brain hook thing, and he takes that, and I thought, well, that, so much for Madeline. But he doesn't. He only replaces her eyes. Even when he takes the knife, I thought, oh my God, he's really gonna like mummify her. He's gonna take her organs out and so on.
For some reason, I thought that it was implied that maybe he did give her the full treatment and pull her brain through her. But I guess she came back, so I guess that's not possible. But
well, I guess right. I guess
supernatural?
yeah. That is a good point, though. I just assumed that it was naturalistic when she returns, but it may
a
not
lot of
be.
blood, coming out of this area. Maybe, I don't know. It was something supernatural going on, is what we talked about with the mother too. It's like, was she just not dead, or was she a reanimated, vengeful corpse? And I think that goes right back to the story that we're based on, right? With the fall of the House of Usher and what's happening there with the sister returns. Is she just not dead, or is she a zombie of some kind? I did love to see that Roderick and Madeline are the two at the core of this, and their bond. They chose to make this deal, and they said it's us against the world. And you could see their mutual destruction if they stayed true to one another and left the world sort of in like as a team. And they said, we've done this together, we made this choice, and now it's come due, and okay, we live the life we live. And she tries to almost set that up, but she's already betrayed him.
Yeah.
And then he betrays her, and ultimately, much like the house itself, this is a house divided. This is a pair of people who are not in harmony with one another, and in fact are antagonists to each other, and they die at each other's throats, literally. Which I think is the most appropriate end for these two. We get Lenore, the AI, texting Nevermore over and over again. I thought we might get something more from this plot line. This is something that I'm fascinated with. It's something that has come up in my fiction before. I'm like trying to talk about artificial intelligence and what it would mean to have another duplicate self. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting space. This is something I'm really into. All we really get from it is this like texting bot. Which ultimately was a cool little reveal, and it does serve as a misdirect, I think, for some viewers that maybe Lenore was still alive. I thought she was dead and that this was the AI pretty much as soon as that concept was introduced, but I'm not sure if everybody else was necessarily on that path yet.
Yeah, it got me, but I am very easily confused. So I really tend to be the person who's like, oh my God, you mean the butler did it?
We talked about that raining body scene. I kept thinking about It's Raining Men song.
It's Raining Men.
Someone's going to put that, with that song on it while we're looking at it. But I thought it was good to like have Roderick confronted. And I just keep coming back to like, Roderick makes a compelling villain / protagonist. He's that anti-protagonist. I don't even want to call him an anti-hero because he's really not a hero at all. But he is like kind of the protagonist. We're following him closely. And what makes him compelling is he does seem capable of feeling guilt. And he seems like he is capable of feeling like, I caused this to befall my children and I feel terrible about it. He seems genuinely human in a way that I think we want to believe that some of these villains could one day feel guilt for the things they've done. I just continue to have my doubts. But ultimately, I think it does make for a compelling story to have him be this way and to have him ultimately, it hurts him with every scene. I think that's one of the things that really sells me on his performance is like, you could see the pain, you could see the guilt. And as far as like talking about adapting a Poe thing, in so many of these stories, we have a character who is driven to that altered state due to some manner of guilt over what's being done, or some manner of friction between what should be and what is, and what what they have caused. Whether or not you want to call it guilt, there's some manifestation of the evil they've done. It can't be contained. It can't be like you can't just go on and live a normal life in Poe's stories if you've done something truly horrific. It's going to come back and bite you.
I think it's fascinating too that it takes all of his children dying and he still doesn't feel guilty, and then he finally feels guilty when Lenore dies, and it's very in keeping with like the Raven, obviously, that like he's talking about Lenore. There obviously wasn't all these other characters for that character to react to the deaths of, but he's such a detestable human being that like it's not one kid dying, two kids dying, three kids, all six of his direct descendants die. And then he's finally like the guilt-stricken Roderick we see that's meeting with Dupin. It's all because of Lenore dying, it seems, as far as I can tell.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say, the younger Roderick did not strike me as a terribly like lustful guy. We're supposed to believe that he has these 4 additional children outside of that original marriage, and the kids say to each other, who knows how many more of us there are, which poses sort of interesting, like I wonder if there could be like a little sequel, like where there's like all these random people die.
That'd be cool.
But so I think
him would be a good an interesting
sequel. Oh yeah. The interesting thing too, just as an aside, is that Lenore calls Usher Grampus, and that's the name of the boat that Pym goes on in the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. So cool. A little like a sort of deep cut Easter egg kind of thing.
I said this last episode where I was like, I think every proper name we get in this entire show is a reference to something in a Poe story.
yeah, probably.
It seems like it.
Bill T. We'll find him somewhere.
It is interesting that ultimately we do have what I would almost call a happy ending for a pretty horrific show, in that the house falls and we hear that through June it's being repurposed. It's now Phoenix. It's this Phoenix Foundation, and it's actually saving people. These horrible people get their comeuppance. The Dupin, who we see as a good man, I think, throughout, and we're sort of worried about him in this situation. It seems like he's being set up to be killed by Usher. I was worried for him. He escapes, and he's able to return to his husband and his family, and sort of realize that that's his true riches. I think he even says, like, I'm the richest man in the world. I'm going to go back to my family. There's really kind of a nice bow put on this otherwise dark, depressing story with a lot of unlikable characters. That's always an interesting decision that a creator has to make in the horror space. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, John, and don't spoil your own novel. But I'm curious, because I haven't got to the end of it yet, so I don't know what decision you make. As a horror writer, you're faced with like a few options when you get to the end of a tale. It's like, is it ultimately a happy ending? Is it ultimately a, oh my god, leave him with a punch in the gut, feeling sick kind of ending? Is it an It Lives ending people talk about, where it's like it's one, but then all of a sudden, oh, the monster's still alive? Right. What are your thoughts on endings in horror, and are they more difficult to achieve than other kind of fiction, or is that just kind of par for the course in fiction?
I think it's just fiction in general, to be honest. I mean, man, I feel like it was E.M. Forster maybe who said that, like, the endings of novels are the hardest part of the novel to write, and every ending has something wrong with it, which is maybe a huge, but it's a sweeping generalization. On the other hand, it sort of takes the burden off you, oh, all right, well, we do the best we can. I am of 2 or 3 or 4 minds. There's a movement right now. People talk about horror with heart, and they want this horror that ultimately is in some way reassuring to them. And I guess you can find that in a variety of different ways, but it clearly seems to lean towards the happy ending or the quasi happy ending, which I think is what we get here. I think there's the feeling, right, with Verna placing all of those objects on the different tombstones, that this is us. We've seen how this entire family destroyed itself, and they were bad people. they succumb to their baser impulses. So there's a form of justice or something like that that was a particularly harsh justice that was served by this. And I don't know if I could have handled the story where the ushers all got away with it.
Right.
I don't know. Like they're just in court still, and the Attorney General of New York is like, they're guilty, I tell you. But I also feel like just sort of thinking generally about horror narratives. I do enjoy horror narratives that leave you at least unsettled. I mean, I think sometimes the hand popping out of the grave, it was scary the first time, but now we're like it's almost comforting. Oh, look at the way they got me at the end there with that little stinger. I think that the horror narrative, there's a fine independent movie called Lake Mungo that manages to do this. It manages to have an ending that it causes you to completely reevaluate the previous film. There's a much more sort of over the top Korean film, The Wailing, which has a similarly weird, and actually ends with a fishing metaphor too. So way to go. But it's it ends in this sort of weird, unsettling kind of way that sticks in my mind. For me, those, I guess, are the endings that I really prefer, because I remember Stephen King's Christine, which was the first Stephen King novel I read, and I say that was the one that, boom, in an instant, I was a horror writer. That has an unsettling ending that I still remember. And I don't know when the last time I read that book was. I know I have read it at least once or twice since I first read it when I was 14. But I could tell you that when I read it when I was 14, it stuck with me. It has stuck with me since then. So has the ending of Pet Sematary is a little more Grand Guignol, but nonetheless, that stuck with me too. So I appreciate people can say, hey, I just want to come to a book and read it to be consoled, for escapist fantasy or whatever. No harm, no foul. That's awesome. The kind of stuff I guess I prefer in terms of writing and then even in terms of reading is the stuff that kind of lingers with me.
I like that. And it is always ironic to think about Stephen King and how he has this, I think, somewhat unearned reputation as being particularly bad at endings. Like, he can write a great novel, but he doesn't know how to end it.
Well, that's the joke in the second It film, right? Of the recent two, right?
Yeah, it gets lampshaded in that movie. But we've covered a bunch of King on this podcast. He's a frequent subject. And I was just on a panel at World Fantasy where I moderated a panel about him. And it's funny how he does have some also really iconic endings and endings that stick with people. He's just written so much. I think he's got a little bit of everything.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think, there were books, 11/22/63 ends in this bittersweet kind of way. Revival ends in utter horror. And I kind of love it for that for that reason, because there's a certain kind of you want to talk about like heavy metal or maybe punk rock kind of that'll be the screen cap for this episode.
Might be.
But there's this certain feeling of just sometimes ferocity feels more honest, I guess, and that's unfortunate because it isn't always. Sometimes the happy ending is the honest ending, and there's King has talked about being young enough to still believe in unhappy endings, and I guess that means I'm still young because I do believe in unhappy endings, but I'm okay with happy endings too.
Yeah.
What a completely long way to give a wishy-washy answer.
Well, here we are at the end of the series. All that's left to do is to sort of cap off our thoughts on this and cast a vote on which we thought was better, whether it was the short story by Edgar Allan Poe. We decided we're going to focus in on just the story, even though we could be talking about a lot more. Just the story. We're going to weigh that against the show. And we're going to have you go last, John, as a potential tiebreaker. We'll see how it plays out. We haven't discussed this beforehand. James, do you want to start first?
I'm going to get off on a technicality here. If we're just talking about Fall of the House of Usher, Poe's story, versus the Fall of the House of Usher and what Flanagan is doing here with this miniseries, I'm going to take the miniseries because I think it did a lot of interesting things in the Poe space. It's doing this modern bleakness of the situation that we're in. And then threading together all of the, I thought that as much as maybe I agree with you, Luke, there was some repetitiveness to the nature of having each episode pointing to one specific Poe story. The way that they thread the needle and thread all of these intertwining Poe stories that were never meant to go together in a fun and compelling story that came out around Halloween. I just really gave myself over to the series and had a really fun time with it. And that part of me that wanted just like a fun horror show that would go for it, and it had like taboo sexuality and like over the top gore and all the things that I couldn't have even imagined that Flanagan would do in a Netflix adaptation of Poe. I kind of liked, and I mentioned in a previous episode how Poe is something that everybody knows, so it feels like a safe space to experiment and do something different. And I felt like that's why I'm going to take the show here.
Quick aside, I was in Florida recently with a bunch of my extended family, and someone who doesn't know I do a podcast came up to me and they said, "I hear you're a writer." And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You look just like Edgar Allan Poe." And I just got such a kick out of that. Because what we were covering right at the moment, they had no idea.
Yeah, that's a compliment.
And I was
right?
like, well, maybe he doesn't normally have the beard, but I could see the hair and the mustache, maybe. So I think I can speak with some authority as someone who looks a little bit like Poe. No, I was torn on this one because I really enjoyed the show. As I talked about in our Hunting of Hill House coverage, I went through a journey with Flanagan. I have some misgivings about Dr. Sleep. Like, there are certain things that like I really like, and then certain choices that I'm not as big a fan of. I really like this one from the jump, you know, even if it had a couple of spots that weren't quite as up to the standard of everything. I kind of got what he was putting down here. I liked the unsubtle, the punch in the face, the angry. This is an angry show, I think you said, John. I really like that description of it. And then reading the story, of course, it's a classic. It's gothic. It does the thing that I love that Poe does, where like every little description of the house and of the landscape, everything echoes back into the same theme and the same story being told, and just every line is quotable. And there's a little bit of that blasphemous nature of like, how dare you not give this to Edgar Allan Poe? He's, you know, who he is. You know, who are we talking about here? It's like when we did Shakespeare in the past, like, how dare you not pick Shakespeare for everything? But I think I'm going to give it to the show here too. As much as it kind of hurts me, as much as I love Poe. And I'll just say that, you know, it's not my favorite story. I like The Fall of the House of Usher. It's not my favorite Poe story. So maybe that is coming into play a little bit too, but yeah, I was on the fence, but I'm going to give it to the show.
Yeah. Again, too, if it was all of Poe's stories that are referenced in this versus
that would be
Flanagan's work, I think that Poe might take it, but that's not what we've, you know, that's not the argument we've given ourselves here.
Honestly, I was more on the side of Poe going into this discussion, but as often happens when we have our episodes, sometimes I'm swayed a certain way. And it kind of pushed me over into Flanagan's territory, but I'm curious, John, ignore what we said. Where are you at with this, and what did you think?
So here's the thing, right? On the one hand, I would agree with you guys. I think that there's a lot of ways in which you have to give it to the show. It's 8 hours long, however many 100 pages of script that must have been, and hours of dialogue, and so on. So from that narrative standpoint, there's a richness to this thing that the story can't compete with. You know, it's a story. What the story, I guess, has going for it, right, is this kind of dreamlike feel. And although it is dense, it's not the worst of Poe stories to try to read. I mean, there are some stories that have not aged particularly well, but it certainly is not The Telltale Heart or The Mask of the Red Death. You know, it takes a little bit of work to get through, especially because of all that descriptive detail. And so in that regard, you know, there are ways in which the story seems as much like a kind of a poem, you know, as if Poe is just trying to get this singular kind of effect, and he's just trying to kind of wig you out, you know. And we get to the end, and the house that looks like a face collapses on itself, and we're just like, wait, was it what just happened? You know, I guess the caveat, I guess, is that, you know, what Poe does right with this story is to make a kind of a structure, pardon the pun, that Flanagan can play with and play in. But then the question, right, would be, what does Flanagan do with that? What does he do with what he's given? And I think what he does with what he's given is pretty remarkable and pretty. And I you know, this is thinking about it in relation to some of his stuff as well, to the Haunting of Bly Manor and the Haunting of Hill House and so on. He does change up the tone here. He does change up the tone from Midnight Mass, I think, might be my favorite of his works, and I think that might be the most kind of well-rounded in a Stephen King kind of way, I guess, sort of narrative character kind of sense. But this is savage. This is unapologetically savage, and it's kind of refreshing in a way to see Flanagan. I think he's a consistent enough filmmaker at this point that he could, throw 8 hours to the wall, right? See what sticks, right? Whereas here, he's still, I think, trying to do something kind of interesting and trying to push. He's not abandoning his old techniques and some of his, old, sort of visual signatures, but he is trying to do something a little different. So yeah, I would give it to Flanagan. And no doubt will be visited by the angry spirit of Edgar Allan Poe tonight. So thanks.
I felt like you were on a journey even with that description.
Yeah, I was thinking, do I want to bail out at the last moment? To bail out at the last? No, he went for it.
It's hard to pick against Poe as a writer, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna get cursed for doing that. I'm gonna start hearing a beating heart later for daring to do that.
Or a raven cawing or something. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to return to Poe, I think. We're going to have to get into some of those other adaptations. I don't know if I've ever seen any of them, so I would love to get into... I've missed a lot of older films, so...
The recent Netflix film, what is The Pale Blue Eye, which is an adaptation of a Louis Bayard novel in which Poe figures as a character, but which also has sort of allusions to some of Poe's stories. The film is actually, to be honest with you, much stronger than I was anticipating. I don't know why.
I think it got some weird mixed reviews when it first came out, but then I've since heard people liked it.
Yeah, it's worth a look. It's a good use of your time.
Well, here at the end, I wanted to ask you, John, where can listeners find your stuff, find you online? And also, is there anything that we should be on the lookout for as far as like upcoming work for you?
You can find me on all the usual social media sites, whatever particular letter they're under these days. And I do have a blog that I update erratically. It's Mr. Gaunt. If you just look for Mr. Gaunt, the web presence for John Langan, you'll find it. And my stuff's all available at the Evil Empires, and but you should totally order it through your local independent bookstore and support them. And I get a bunch of short stories coming out and different things. As I said, for the moment, I guess I'm trying to get this next novel done, although that's probably going to be about another year till I'm through with that. But I have a story coming out. Ellen Datlow has an anthology called Christmas and Other Horror Stories or something like that, and I have a story in that. So yeah, along with a bunch of amazingly talented people. So yeah, take a look at that. That's one you should be able to find in your local bookstore.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a delight to speak with you. I'm
you
glad
too.
we were able to reconnect after years ago when I met you at ReaderCon. This was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. There's nothing like great conversation, great smart conversation.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine.
So if you enjoyed this episode and us having John Langan on as a guest, if you enjoyed us talking about the fall of the House of Usher, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you that way.
And also make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, everywhere you can find us. Please do.
And if you'd like to support this podcast another way, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm. And on there, we get all kinds of bonus episodes where we talk about other adaptations of works that we're covering on the main feed. Now that we've just covered Poe, I think we've opened the door to a lot of other adaptations. I know there are other versions of The Fall of the House of Usher. So that would be one that we might go to, other versions of The Pit and the Pendulum. There's lots of stuff that's on the table, and that would come out first on our Patreon. So definitely check that out if you'd like to support us.
And thank you to Mark Vandermeulen for our intro and outro music. It's the track The Hunt.
All right. So all that's left to do here is, for those of you who have stuck around to the very end, we're going to go ahead and announce what our next project's going to be. And that's going to be The Hunger Games, a book and a movie that I have seen. It's been a few years. I'm excited to get back to it. We thought it would be fun to revisit that now that there's this new Hunger Games book and movie, I think, that are both out. Or the movie's coming out, the book's already out. So it's going to be a time where people are going to be thinking about the Hunger Games. I thought it'd be fun to return to that source, right? That first one.
I remember reading it when it came out. It was a massive craze, obviously. Everyone's at least somewhat familiar with it. So yeah, let's get back into it. I think the new one's called like The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes or something along those lines.
Yeah, I realized I didn't know the name of it as I was talking, so I'm not going to try it. But that sounds right.
But yeah, it's fun to get into these YA projects sometimes, and it lets us, we had fun with Twilight earlier in the year, so hopefully we can have similar, fun with a story like this.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think I was more fond of the Hunger Games. Anyway, that's a big discussion. We'll get into it. We'll get into it next week, and hopefully you return for that. But this one's run long enough. So until next time,
keep adapting.